Hello and welcome to part 2 of Audible River with Scot Gresham-Lancaster as my guest. I'm Alan Rice. And just to catch you up, Scot is a composer and innovator in sound design and sound technology. And I think, Scot, that you're ready to play some samples of your work for us. And we're going to talk about listening to data, history of some of your work, and listen to some of your files.
Yeah, that's where we're at. So this is part 2 because of something that never happens to me, which is a technical difficulty. I mean, I'm like a hyper nerd, to be honest. I mean, I've been doing technology forever, and there's always something complicated. I mean, I just did a duo with a saxophone player and electronics with pitch following and all this stuff, and just before we went on, someone stepped on a cable, and the sub-miniature cable that powered my mixer broke, like right, like just before we were going to go on. So I had to run out the car and grab something, and it was like a just like this, just a kind of panic of technology. So that's part of the deal. Why I'm not too worried about AI, because I mean,
Really? Okay, why not?
but I am sort of interested in that whole area and using it in this more advanced area of sonification to figure out ways of finding a bridge between things. I mean, they're using AI now, and this is a segue into my later work, which I did want to talk about, and we had to sign off a little early because of that technical snafu.
Yeah.
And that is that I just did a big piece for the Bath Maritime Museum called Sea Change, which was about the marine life 80 miles southeast of Portland in the Gulf of Maine. There's something called Cash's Ledge, which is a maritime sanctuary that was set aside by the Obama administration. That was pulled by the Trump administration. It's still pretty. The actual seamen that are out there, the lobstermen and the fishermen and stuff, really respect this area, and there hasn't been any drilling or anything. The thing that's threatening it now probably is the fact they're going to be putting up some windmills off the coast. And so they're going through a lot of rigmarole about, where to put the windmills, because this is basically a mountain that just comes up out of the sea bottom, and it's just rich with life. I mean, it's just like an amazing, marine sanctuary, basically. And what I did with that piece was to work with a bioacoustician who's been tracking the right whales, which are the particularly endangered whale species in the Gulf of Maine. But all the whales, there's humpbacks and narwhals and a bunch of different whales that migrate and feed along in a kind of zigzag pattern across the Gulf of Maine, and they've tracked them pretty thoroughly, each species. And I found this like chart that was like the migration pattern of each species, and so I made an 8-channel mix and got the sounds from a bioacoustician, this guy, Dr. Chris Tremblay at the University of Maine in Orono, Maine. And I took all those sounds and made a mix that was true to their migration patterns. In other words, I panned the sound across the space in the way that the whales actually go. And I gave every day 4 seconds. So it's a 22, if you do the math, 365 times 4 seconds, you end up with around 20, 22, 24 minutes. I forget exactly. But, the loop itself of the thing is 1 year of migration. And so that's an example, kind of a detail, takes a lot of explanation, but that is a sonification of data. I just took the data of migration. I took the whale sounds and used that as the marker for what we call the cursor on a visual graph. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I painted across the thing. Now, whether that's informative or not, I don't know, but it was a way of organizing what is at the very least a sound art piece. And I have that. I'm not. You hearing that?
Yes.
That's a narwhal right there. Oh, there's a little bit of humpback. That's actually cod. That thing.
Oh,
Blue whale right there. Narwhal again. So that's about a month's worth right there, just of stuff. That's just in two channels, but you get the idea. Were you able to hear that,
oh
Alan?
my goodness! Yeah, that was amazing. I was kind of getting mesmerized with all those different
Yeah,
sounds.
there's a lot of detail in there. I had eight. There were eight channels, and there were eight streams of things being panned around. It's much more interesting, in my opinion, in eight channels. But and this has been an experience I've had with lots of museums. Of course, they turned it way down as soon as as soon as it was in the space. It sounded. At the opening there were too many people. Nobody could hear it because everybody was talking and drinking champagne and whatever. And then when you're alone in the space, they had turned it down so far because the people that have to actually be in the museum all the time, they get sick of it. It's going around and around and playing good whale sounds for their whole work shift. It's enough to drive anybody crazy, really. I mean, I get it, but at the same time, it's just a sort of problematic aspect of all of this stuff
But
is like that.
it's really interesting when it's novel. But I guess if you were listening to this all day, every day, yeah, it starts to wear on you. It's
Well, I don't know. I mean, some people listen to like country western music all day, every day, and they're fine. So it just depends. It depends on whether you want to hear it or not.
no criticism to
Sort of,
country western fans, right?
yeah, yeah, or well, what are Bella Canto, whatever. Uh, it's good. Whatever. I did this piece, and I was really proud of it though because it was very scientifically accurate, and yet it just came off like some kind of like weird art piece. So that's the kind of area that I've been residing in all along, and because that listening to data sonification is such a strange space that people are not familiar with. I did hear a thing in the 18th century, late 18th century, when the French made the first graph, XY coordinate, something that we totally understand. That the x-axis is the amount and the y-axis is time,
Hmm.
and this is the stock exchange is going up and down over time or whatever, and we totally get that. But there was a 17-page explanation of what was going on with that simple idea because they didn't know what this is, just like some lines. I don't understand what you mean. And so you had the bottom line represents time and the upper one is what the stock price is, and it's an easy enough concept to get, but that's because we grew up on graphs, and sonification's got the same kind of problem. You have to do this big like I had to do that big explanation of, there are this migration of the whales, and it's going to pan back and forth, and blah blah blah, and you got to know all that. You can't just hear the sound and automatically go, oh, that's whales in the Gulf of Maine, and this is their migration pattern. You just don't have any way of knowing because there's no labels on anything, and you kind of have to talk about it. I mean, the other interesting project that my power shortage problem brought up that didn't get talked about was something that is about a 20 years old project now that my friend Bert Barton, who's an amazing I don't know what you'd call him. He's an impresario and a music performer and a theater producer, and he, for example, did a production of Dante's Inferno in a clean trash, so like recycled wood and not like bad trash, but like you know,
Uh-huh.
a clean kind of. But he built a whole set and then made this kind of football stadium truck that drove around the site, and they built the set out of the leftover refuse in this, and did a whole version of Dante's Inferno, or Faust. He did a whole version of Faust. I'm sorry, inside this trash midden uh, with the surround sound and this big tilted thing with the audience sitting on a raked like kind of bleachers, like football bleachers, and drove around the dump, you know, where the performance was. I mean, he does weird stuff like that. But so he and I have been collaborating on pieces for lots of years, and we were at Muir Woods in Marin County in California, and I took him there, and he'd never really seen a redwood grove. And we just happened to have something called a crackle box with us, which was this thing that was developed in Amsterdam at a center called Stein. And it was like kind of it took your finger pressure and sensitivity and played like weird electronic music based on how you squeezed it and stuff. So it's called a crackle box. And I had one of those with me just for fun in my pocket. And we stuck it on the tree, and it started going like, I mean, and this is like literally 25 years ago. And he got the idea for talking trees. So if people in the audience want to go to talkingtrees.com, you can check out that just grew into this whole thing. And Bert really has gone all out with all his production skills and everything. And he has a festival. He owns a chateau in near Vesoul, France, and he has a Talking Trees festival. For 2 summers now he's had it, and it's kind of become an annual thing. And basically, it's all this music and meditation and just kind of simpatico energy with trees. And so we've made a bunch of music using parameters coming live off of trees and performing for audiences. So we did something in Bergijk, in the Netherlands, at the Stilling Festival, where we had a big tree next to the stage, and it was all wired up, and we did this live performance that I think I could play a little bit of that. Let me see if I can.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, if you go to talkingtrees.com, it's there for sure. But yeah, no, here it is. Here. Well, I'll stop it there for now. I mean, the thing to know is that each one of those arpeggios is a day worth of data of the tree. So the little variations that are happening in that arpeggio are the variations that are happening in a tree. And then the timbral variations, which might not come across on this podcast that easily, but there are these very subtle tonal variations that are happening in the drone behind it. And that's what's happening on the actual tree that is listening to its own data of months of information, or if it's listening. I don't know how trees listen actually, because they probably do. I don't know. I mean, this is a very weird area that we're getting into, which leads to the next part of this whole thing.
Hey, I have a question about what we just heard. So, are you saying that it had a sort of rhythm, it had a sort of melody, and are you saying that all of that is like a normal cycling of a tree in a day after day? So we
got the data from a guy at the University of Utrecht, Frank. I can't remember Frank's last name, but he's a philologist, which is well, that's a stamp collector. I forget, but the guy who does, the botanist who specializes in trees, and he gave us this data, and then we sort of turned it into this, and found these patterns which looked like arpeggios to us once we spread up the time domain. To be so every go bum 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 bum. That's 2 days I just did right there. I mean, so but then we would play that against what was really going on with the tree in real time, which is a much slower thing. It's basically a big bell curve that goes up till noon, but it depends on the weather, and it depends on the time of year, and it depends on how the specifics of the tree and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you know what, Scott? I mean, honestly, I could see a time when people could be taking in this kind of information in a normal way. Like they'd be just as like you were saying, be just as used to hearing this as looking at a graph and grasping what they're.
Well, I mean, this is something I've been working on. I don't know whether it's a tree or weather data for that matter. I mean, I think if we got used to hearing some kind of thing that was the weather forecast, where it goes like, you go, oh, well, it's going to be foggy in the beginning of the day, and then the sun's coming out, and then there's going to be rain around 3. But you could actually have specific sounds for each of those that you're used to, and we don't have that. I mean, but that could be a thing, and it would be very easy to have a little snippet of sound that just told you the whole forecast, and the intensity and pitch of things would tell you how strong the rainstorm was going to be, and all that kind of stuff. Because we can really decode a lot of information. I mean, they call it the music cognition. That there's a lot just or auditory cognition actually, and then it gets, like I said, there's like this threshold between music and sound that's very complicated. That's become even more complex with noise music and things like that. But the most interesting thing is that this tree piece really is about time scale a lot of times, and even the way I sped up the whales. To really listen to these things in the time that they're happening is much more meditative and stretched out, and life happens really a lot slower actually on that level, and you're sort of forcing it into this sort of TikTok, Instagram time span, attention
Right,
span. Like
right.
bumper stickers and memes become like the political arguments instead of like long discourse about ideas anymore. And it's the same kind of thing. And so that's one of the things I like about it, is it kind of forces you to really think about time and the effect of time on the experience of things and that kind of stuff.
Well, Scott, and what are you currently working on at the moment? I mean, you probably have a lot of projects. What's your favorite thing that's got your mind brewing at the moment?
Well, I'm actually something's come up with the Talking Trees project, where I am. There's a group called Heart Math that the listeners can look up. That's based out of Marin, or Boulder Creek. I forget, but anyway, they're in California, but they're sort of an international thing, and they've taken over. This is a segue into a thing. Something I've been working on. There's a hub piece of mine called Noosphere, which is a term by Teilhard de Chardin, which is a reference to the global consciousness. And he was of a mind that there was this alpha, and there was this omega point, which was the collection of all consciousness on the planet, was probably a manifestation of God or something like that. I mean, he was a Jesuit priest and a paleontologist, so really interesting combo. He got in a lot of trouble with the Catholic Church, but he was a devout Catholic. But anyway, interesting guy. And the noosphere was this piece of mind. There was a guy at the Global Consciousness Research Institute at Princeton University, a guy named Roger Nelson, who was doing a thing where he was working with John Walker, who's the guy who started who's AutoCAD. He was
Oh yeah.
he was like a tech billionaire. He sold AutoCAD, moved to Switzerland, started something called Formulab, and he was distributing these random generators all over the world that could send out UDP addresses. I'm getting technical here, but sending out whether it was a 1 or a 0, like just flipping back for 1 0 1 like that. And then there was a collection of them, and this was called the Global Consciousness Project.
Oh.
And so I did a piece called Noosphere that took the data in real time off the Noosphere thing and with the hub and played that. I mean, I could play a little snippet of that if you want just
Could
to
you
hear.
really? Because
Yeah,
wow.
yeah, I got that piece ready to go here.
Let's hear it.
Here, I'll go into it a little bit. Well, that's, I mean, it goes on like that. It's like a 10-minute piece, but basically that was data directly off of this global consciousness project. And the reason why I started talking about that, I know you asked me about the current project. I just, long story, it's a long story. Um, and the Global Consciousness Project, Roger Nelson is now an emeritus professor, and the Heart Math Institute took over this project. And so if you go there, you can find this same project going on, the research of, and the interesting thing about it is they were finding uh, correlations of this random numbers when there were big events, like when 9/11 happened, there'd be these like spikes of coherence. When Princess Di died, every New Year's there's like a kind of coherence that follows the time around the globe, follows midnight. When, so in other words, when the collective uh, consciousness focuses on together, you get these like coherences of randomness, which is really weird
Okay, all right.
phenomenon.
This is fascinating to me. So let me just yeah, talk this back. So you got random number generators all over the
Yeah,
world, right?
yeah.
And so they're constantly being recorded. And what you're
And they're
saying,
not they're not just to be clear, they're true random. They're based on radioactive cobalt radioactive tabs. So they're not, they really are random. They're not like some pseudo random number generator in
not
a computer.
not algorithmic or anything like that. This
Yeah,
is
yeah,
this
right.
is
There's
like
no numbers involved. They're a physical phenomenon that's random.
it's a physical phenomenon. Oh, that makes it even more interesting to me because so what we're saying, what you're saying, there is a real there's proof of a correlation between global mental state, let's say a global conscious participation in some event, and
Yeah,
these random numbers that are generated. There seems to
right.
be some correlation. There, this is the thing that's really interesting to me, and I've had other people on my podcast that kind of touch on this sort of thing. It's like, it's an essential question that I've had all of my life in my mystical mind is like, just what kind of influence do each of us have as individuals on reality? And so now
Right.
this technology is right in there with that question.
Well, and the heart math people, so they did that, but they also did a thing with trees. So they have a thing. If you pay them $600, you can hook up your tree to their tree network, and they're doing. I mean, they're just looking at the voltage potential change, just like, well, instead of using a random number generator, they're using trees, but it's the same kind of thing. And so, to answer your question about what I'm currently doing, is they post all that stuff up on the internet, and it's basically an Arduino for those of you with technical background that is looking at the voltage change of the difference between the Earth, literally the ground, like you drive a spike into the ground, and like you would for your house to get your neutral for your electrical system, and the tree. And there's a electrical potential that's different, that's based on the bioactivity of the tree, or somewhat influenced by the bioactivity of the tree. To me, it's not the best sensor, but it is a sensor of the tree's physiology. And, that's a whole thing in itself. But the bottom line is that they have these things hooked up to the internet, so I can go and get this data off this tree in Turkey, where they've asked us to write a piece for an orchestra based on the tree data, Bert and I. And so we're working with these Turkish musicians. This is the current project that I'm kind of starting to uh, ramp up on, is to take the tree data, which is part of this heart math thing, and turn it into a composition that can be played by a woman's Turkish orchestra in Marmaris, Turkey
Wow.
in May or June.
That is fascinating. So Scott, if anybody wanted to keep track of what you're up to, can they just look you up on the web? Do you have a website?
Yeah, I mean, Scot.Gresham-Lancaster.com. And Gresham Lancaster is all one big, gigantic combination of my wife and my name, which is, we did that in back in '77 when I first met you, Alan.
That's right, 77. That was a while
That
ago.
was a long time
That's
ago.
that's another podcast. We can talk about those days.
Al and I re-met later on, like kind of like, are you kidding me? Like I met you in Richmond, Virginia, and then we both ended up in Oakland somehow. And, it's like,
Yes,
so,
that's right. That's right. Yeah, that's definitely another story. Hey, you know what? I
yeah.
think that is good for our time here on this
Oh, okay, yeah,
episode.
sure. Well, I
Yeah,
can wrap on. I got more, man. I got.
I know you do. We can make this right. So
The home
we're
consciousness thing is very interesting. And I think those who are interested might want to look into the heart math thing. They call this heart coherence is the thing they're into, and they have biological sensors. One other thing, just before we completely, part of this thing is I'm working on a piece called Tree Hugger, which is a way of generating music only if you're hugging a tree. So it's picking up your physiology and the tree's physiology, and the music. It's what they call an and. It's got to be a human and a tree in order for there to be any music. And
so are you going to like make an app for this or something? Can anybody do
I'm
this?
gonna make a little easy to strap on tree hugging device. Yeah, I'm working on that. Now, it might just be something I use in performance and not. I mean, like I'm not trying to be Elon Musk here or something. It's like I don't. I really not very good with the commercial sector at all. But I am interested in these ideas, and I like the way people input. And this guy Jorgen Bergs, Jorgen. What was Jorgen's last name? Anyway, this guy I took him to Methuselah, which is up on Skyline, and showed him it's a very old growth tree. It's the one that they left after cutting down all the old grandfathers and grandmothers along the ridge there in Skyline Boulevard above Woodside, California. And he hugged that tree, and he comes from a family of psychics and stuff. And he was there for 45 minutes hugging the tree, and he was having all sorts of visions and stuff. And that was like literally tree hugging, like people cast aspersion on tree huggers, but this guy was literally like really getting into it and having some kind of psychic communion with the tree. So this is what influenced, in conjunction with the talking trees thing, it just made me think, I should do a piece around this.
Absolutely. It's a real thing. And you know what? I would love to one day see the Scot Gresham-Lancaster catalog of weird gadgets. I mean, that would.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I would love that, man. I think I would like get on a subscription to that.
It has all this goofy stuff. Yeah, it's like that.
Okay.
Well, anyway, yeah. Well, it's great talking to you, Alan. And,
yes. Same here. Same here. And that is all for this episode of Audible River. If you have any thoughts you'd like to share, you can email us at audibleriverpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening.